Hello and welcome back to everyone that's tuned in to the American Ultra Stock channel. Thank you so much for tuning in. Great news today. Maybe for some of you it was yesterday. At the time of this recording, we were so happy and thrilled to announce that Greg is gone. Bye, like in the words of Tack on Twitter, bye Bozo. Thanks for nothing, really. I mean, bare minimum. It got our expectations set at the very lowest of the lowest in terms of standards. So now there's a vacancy. We'll see how long this worldwide search by Matt Crocker is going to take, but we decided to take it upon ourselves just to throw out some names right here that we think are realistic with a top 5 managers that should be the new head coach for the USMNT and could. We went with some realistic ones, and honestly, I think it's a very interesting list to go down to. We're also going to do a few of the honorable mentions that could be out there for the job. Let's hope that USSF gets this one right. Straight to the point in the 5th position, and we're also going to throw out some honorable mentions.
So to start things off, we'll just go over a couple honorable mentions since this is a combined top 5. It's not 5 each, so I think there's definitely some names left off the list that deserve to at least be mentioned. I'll start with one that I think has been very popular within the fan base. Hervé Renard, the former Saudi Arabia coach, of course. Former coach of a lot of teams. He's a very experienced manager, but currently is managing the French women's team. But after the Olympics, his contract will be up, which means that he will be available. And I think that if you look at his international experience, just the number of teams that he's actually managed, Zambia, Morocco, Saudi Arabia, I mean, he's achieved some significant success with, I would say, all of them. And I think what we need in our manager is, I think the most important thing is someone who does have that international experience. I mean, you'll probably see when we get to our actual top 5, there are a lot of managers on there that do have that, but I think Renard has more than most, if not all of them. And maybe I think he's a little bit overrated by some fans just because the only thing they can remember is him beating Argentina at the World Cup. I think a lot of fans don't even remember that he won the AFCON back about a decade ago at Zambia. But I do think that, over Greg, he's definitely an improvement, and I think he'd be up there for one of the best managers we've ever had. So I think he's at least worth a mention for an honorable mention spot. And then another one, I think an American, I'll go with one because I think it's realistic that we do hire an American. David Wagner, from obviously the German American, as it seems like so many managers are these days, and players even as well. Obviously of fame in most notably managing for England. He accomplished the incredible feat of actually keeping Huddersfield Town in the Premier League for a season longer than they should have. And I mean, they probably shouldn't have even been in the league in the first place. So incredible achievements with them. He most recently managed Norwich, managed Josh Sargent, so he has experience there. And I think ultimately he's one of the best American managers out there. Admittedly, it's not a very strong pool. We don't really produce many great managers, and the only one who you can say is really maybe top quality is Hertzler, but his American ties are a little bit questionable. I mean, he was just born here and he's off to manage Brighton now, so he's not a realistic option to get. Maybe in 20 years, who knows? But I think for now, those are a couple honorable mentions that I wouldn't hate to see by any means, but don't crack the top 5.
Yeah, for me, I'm going to start with one that recently, club-wise, everywhere he goes, it causes a lot of turmoil, a very controversial figure, but it's going to be Jorge Sampaoli. And I know that there is a requirement to speak English, but he has said back in 2016 when he was approached to possibly be a part of Chelsea, and he said that it wasn't good enough. Well, when he went to Brazil, someone asked him if there was an offer to come when he coached Santos and took them to a Libertadores final with a very bad squad. And he said that, well, if an offer comes from England now, I know enough English to take a job there. So I think he fulfills that first quota that I think was the biggest one. And if you look at his career internationally, won Chile their first ever Copa America, arguably should have beaten Brazil and bailed the Brazilians out of the 7-1 because that match went to penalties at the World Cup, and very famously Pinilla hit the crossbar at extra time, so he really could have taken Chile to honestly a quarterfinal, and from then on you don't know what can happen. I think that Sampaoli has been a good coach when he was at Chile. When he coached Argentina, things didn't go as well, but all of the players, Lucas Villa said famously that it was the best system they had worked under. Man management was a little bit questionable because he always extracts so much from the players. He demands a lot. I mean, one of his staff just punched a player in Flamengo, but at the same time, he does extract the best out of them. And they said that the system that he laid out when he was at Argentina was crucial to them eventually winning. A lot of the players do credit his time there. So I think that there's no questions. He's a great manager, very good manager, but maybe a bit of a character that I would like specifically in this scenario, because it would go completely against what USSF is, this commodity, all this friendship, buddy thing. I think it would actually be good. And the fact that English isn't his first language would probably allow some room for him to be a little bit more reserved with the criticism. The other guy I'm going to mention, it's a wild take. I don't think anyone would have thought this one, is Michael Laudrup. He was very famously the coach that led Swansea City to the Premier League, also did really well to win a League Cup with Swansea. I mean, that's a major trophy with a club from Wales in England. And then he has been involved here and there in the staff with Denmark, who had really good runs, and most famously in the, not this Euros, but the last Euros, he was a part of the staff. And I think that he has good experience as a player. He was a magical player. And as a manager, he has done well. Said that he's not willing to take a job for now because he's enjoying his retirement, but wouldn't be putting it out of question for the future. So now moving on to the top 5, the 5th position on our official countdown. Braden, do you want to introduce us to him?
Yeah, so at number 5, like I said about David Wagner, we're going to pick a couple Americans in there just because I think it is the most realistic option, knowing USSF. And we went for Hugo Perez, the USMNT, I won't say legend, but he played a lot, over 70 caps for the team, 13 goals. And he's definitely a notable figure in USMNT history. Of course, managed our youth teams in the past before moving to El Salvador, where he was born, of course, and rising up the ranks with their team, starting as an assistant, going to their U23s, and then ultimately taking over the senior team. And I think in all terms of things, overachieving. Now, if you look at his results with El Salvador, you don't see anything that lights the world on fire. You don't see any reason to be optimistic, really. But then when you consider the team that he was working with, consider that it is El Salvador. I mean, they're not really used to doing much of anything. I think all things considered, he probably overachieved with that team. Yes, maybe towards the end of his tenure, it wasn't great, and that is why he ultimately did get sacked. But I think he at least has a real sense of tactical ideas, which is something that we know Greg didn't/does have. So I wouldn't be opposed to it. If we're going to go with one of the more realistic options, and I think if we're being true to ourselves, USSF will probably end up hiring an MLS coach, which I want to make clear right now, an MLS coach is not acceptable. I know that they might end up hiring one, but it's basically just replacing Greg with Greg 2.0. I know that some of the coaches in MLS might be better than Greg. I mean, most of them probably are, but it's still not anything that's going to help us achieve anything meaningful. So no to MLS coaches, but if you're going to go, the next step there in terms of realism is probably Hugo Perez. So that's why he's at number 5 for us.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think players like him, and after their buddy Greg would have left, it would be, I think, an easy transition for them. And he's cheap, and honestly, very close. El Salvador is almost next door. They're still in the same area, so the worldwide search doesn't need to go too far. So I think it's a great reason behind that one. Number 4, also in the region, Christensen. Why do you think that he would be a good option, Braden? Do you think it could happen?
I love Thomas Christensen as a manager, of course, managing Panama. If we want to talk about overachieving, I mean, the program that he has built there and the team is special. Obviously, we all know that he knocked us out of the group at the Copa America and achieved something historic for Panama, getting them to the knockouts. Yeah, they got battered by Colombia, but I mean, so did we in a friendly, so it's really not much different. We would have got battered as well if we had actually qualified. I mean, it's not really a cause for concern, that result. I think the fact that he even overachieved with, let's face it, if you look at the quality on paper of Panama, they have maybe 2 good players in Carrasquilla and Michael Murillo, but outside of that, it's a very mediocre team. I don't think any of them makes our starting lineup, even Carrasquilla. I'd put Carrasquilla in there, actually, but outside of that, just because of how our midfield played in the tournament, I think they were all very below par. But outside of that, I mean, their team's pretty poor. I think if let's put it under perspective. If they had Greg as their manager, and he does speak Spanish, so there is that. He is, I guess, a qualified guy for them. If they had him, they would have probably finished bottom of the group with 0 points. Christensen's an incredible coach. The one thing that is a bit of a concern with him is his lack of experience at the top level. I mean, Panama is the most success he's had at any level. His other success really was winning the Cypriot League, which, I mean, there's nothing that you can take stock into that. But at least he won something. When Greg was in the Swedish second division, he didn't win anything. So at least there's that, I guess, for Christensen. But ultimately, I think if we're going to go for somewhat realistic options, he's in the region. He did speak to Canada in the past, which is a big thing as well. So I don't think he'd be opposed to leaving Panama necessarily if we gave him the right offer. It's a very encouraging job, like you said. So I think Christensen would be somewhat realistic, but also a huge upgrade.
Yeah, and also kind of cheap, honestly, within that budget if they want to be saving money. So very already knows the region. If they want to put that on their statement, it sounds like such a USSF thing to do, that he already knows the region, overachieved there. So honestly, I think it's a very reasonable choice. If we are going with the more realistic ones, I'm okay if it was him. Honestly, it doesn't set the world on fire, but I think it's a way better manager that took his nation to punch above their weight. Now, number 3, this is where we start to get in the more hopeful area. I think that a lot of people have this guy as perhaps the front runner if we are to hire an American, and understandably so. He's been doing so well in Germany. Pellegrino Materazzo. Do you believe that he would take the job? Do you think that he would be the man for the job? He's quite young for a manager. What is your opinion on him, Braden?
Well, I mean, I think we all know that Pellegrino Matarazzo is probably the second best American manager, hands down. If we're going to consider Hurstler American, which I think we have the right to, then he's number 1, probably. I mean, to be honest, Matarazzo has probably accomplished more than him, so you can even make the argument there. The one concern I do have about him is that, like you said, he's a young manager. I feel like traditionally managers tend to go the club route when they're a little bit younger, and then as they reach towards the twilight of their careers, we'll say, for most, they end up going to the international game. I think international managers are usually a lot older than club managers are, but there's obviously a lot of options that, I mean, contradict that, and he is American, which is the big thing. I think that the fact that he just achieved Europe with Hoffenheim is a big thing. I mean, when he came in, they were in a relegation battle. Not only did he survive relegation, which would have been an embarrassment for the club considering their current stature in the Bundesliga, but then next season he goes up, gets 7th place for them. I think a great achievement. When he was at Stuttgart, I do have a little bit of some concerns considering that as soon as he left, they ended up finishing 2nd in the Bundesliga, but I think that's more down to how incredible their new manager Hoeneß is, as opposed to how bad, or I guess mediocre, Matarazzo is. He did his job there at the end of the day. He kept them in the Bundesliga. That's all he was asked to do. And then he went to Hoffenheim, overachieved so far. I think the fact that he did qualify for Europe means he might want to stay there. He'd probably be a more realistic option for after the 2026 cycle. I think there's 2. I think our number 1 and number 2 are both probably short-term options, considering I mean, it's different reasons for both of them. But if we could bring in one of them for the next 2 years, we'll get to them very soon, obviously, and then bring in Matarazzo after 2026 for the long term, that would be my ideal scenario.
Yeah, I think that at some point it's going to happen. It's meant to happen. I do think he's the best manager, the American manager out there. I mean, he has proven more. I think that he has been in the trenches in relegation battles, has shown that he can turn things around, has been exposed to different play styles against some of the best teams in the world, and done his job. Never failed to meet the expectations and overachieved this year with John Brooks playing a lot of games too. So I think that, honestly, props to Matarazzo. He has said in the past that it would be hard to turn down a job like the USMNT. He's quite young still. I think that it's not going to happen right now, but hey, if he was announced, I think it would be a burst of energy to the squad. And I don't know if the squad would take it too well because they love Greg, but I think for the fan base, certainly it would be a guy that we can say, hey, he has this to back his resume. So now we leave the realism to a more of honestly wishful thinking territory right here, where we move to one of 2 Germans. Everybody knows who's going to be first one, but in the second spot, we're going to put Joachim Low. He did so well to win a World Cup with Germany. Some may say it was too talented, but so it was down to the talent. But Braden, how do you see this guy? Do you think that would ever happen? Let's remind ourselves, he has said in the past, he has traveled throughout the United States extensively with his family, and he loves the country. So do you think it could happen?
Well, I alluded to this as one of the possible options when I talked about Matarazzo, and I do think just given his extensive career as a manager, I mean, at the club level, he managed a lot of clubs really within Germany, a couple in Turkey, Austria, and then went to Germany, managed them from 2006 to 2021. Obviously, it is most well known for winning the World Cup and for the Euros incident. That was off the pitch, but we won't speak about that. Everyone has their embarrassing moments. But I just think due to how long he has been a manager, he probably would only come in. Obviously, this is probably a fantasy scenario, but if he were to come in, it probably would only be until after the 2026 World Cup. But that's fine. Then we can go get someone like Matarazzo, someone younger, someone who can be with us for the long haul. But until then, the 2026 World Cup is the most important tournament that we've ever had for US soccer. This is our chance to grow the game in the country for good and to accomplish Greg's ultimate one goal of changing the way the world views US soccer and changing the way that the US views US soccer too, because I think even within the country, it's the most popular youth sport, which is nice, and I expect it to keep growing on that level. But it's also, when you look at the professional level, it's probably the fourth most popular sport, maybe even fifth. So there's a lot of growth to be done there, and that starts by having a great World Cup campaign on home soil, getting the neutrals, the casuals excited about this team, this program. And the way we can do that is bring in one of the most experienced and successful international managers in the game right now. And Joachim Low is that.
And now to explain on why our number one spot is not Jurgen Klopp. Originally, as everyone would have thought, all USMNT fan base was hopeful that he was going to be the one to take on the role, or at least be a realistic option. But the news came out today that he rejected an initial approach, so we can try to hold on to the hope that it was an initial approach, but ideally we know that he's not going to take the job. So we have replaced him with a worthy name of a number one spot. Who is it, Braden?
So we went for someone who is probably also going to be a little unrealistic, but he's been out of a job for a while now. Maybe he'll be trying to get back into the managerial scene. And like we've been saying throughout the video, it's a very attractive job position to take. So we went for Zinedine Zidane. I mean, I think it's definitely an ambitious claim. We did reach out to him in the previous cycle before we eventually brought back Berhalter after that whole worldwide search. Maybe this new worldwide search will have different results. I expect that we'll at least try to get most of the names that are out there, even ones that we didn't even mention in this video. I think there's so many great options, but I think we all know what Zidane's done. He's only been a manager in total for like 5 years or so, and he won 3 Champions League, several La Ligas, did so much with Real Madrid. And I think if he does have ambition for himself in the manager's game, there is also a possibility that he just took over Real Madrid because they needed him to, and he loves the club, of course. But if he wants to progress his career, I think taking over the USMNT would be a great job to do that. I mean, we already spoke about it. We're hosting the World Cup in 2 years. It's the biggest moment in US soccer history. And if he could lead us to a good run there, I think it would further cement his status as one of the best managers in the game, despite the little experience that he does have. And of course, he's a legend as a player, and we know from some of his moments as a player, especially that headbutt in the World Cup final, that he doesn't take anything from anybody. So he would hold the players accountable, and I think that's been a big issue with the team, that maybe the mentality isn't exactly there. I think he would establish that. He would make sure it's a no-nonsense locker room that is ready to win, because that's all he's been around his entire career playing. And as a manager, all he's done is win. So I think he's the perfect guy to come in. Obviously, we would have loved to have Klopp, and maybe it'll still happen, but I think it was better for us to just replace him here because it looks like it's probably not going to happen.
Yeah, for the sake of realism, even though it's not the most realistic option, we thought we'd put out an option that at least hasn't said no yet. I mean, in the past, we've reached out to him, like Braden said, so hey, who knows? I think it's worth a try. Again, one of the reasons why I think he'd be really good for us is because at Real Madrid, when he came onto this team, he had to adapt his system to the players he had at his disposal. And that's very similar to what happens at the international level. You can't really afford to make signings. You have to just adjust with the players that you have at your disposal. He has been exposed to multiple types of league battles, playing against really high quality teams, different systems, has tried a few different formations as well. So I think that he has the repertoire to be a qualified coach, and what a jump that would be from Berhalter to Zinedine Zidane. So let us know in the comments below what you think of this. Do you think that there's any chance that he could be reached out again? Would you like to see him? I don't see his name getting thrown out into the mix anymore. Maybe now we should try to keep aiming high. I like that USSF, and props to them for at least making the initial contact with Klopp and having a go at him. I wasn't fully expecting that. So hey, if that's the bar that we're trying to set, let's be hopeful. And it's a good time to be a USMNT fan, because we got rid of the guy no one liked, and now it can only be onwards and upwards from here. So please leave a like, subscribe, share with your friends, and we'll see you next time.